What is up, people of YouTube? I'm your host Vernon. This is Echo Bay. Let's fish that. Alright, ladies and gents, the fall transition can be a very difficult time to find fish. Certain fish stop feeding, certain fish start feeding. You have to find these fish, and to be honest, it's quite difficult. Over the last week I've gone out on a couple of missions and I got skunked on all of them. It seems that the big problem here at Lake Mead, normally the bait fish are up shallow, hiding in some bushes. But this year, because the water level is that low, no bushes up close, so the fish move into deeper water, schooling together in deep water, and of course all the predatory fish follow them out there. So if you're on a boat or a kayak, great way to find the fish out there. But for us bank anglers here up close, it can be difficult to find fish. For that reason, we made our way out here to Echo Bay. We have some deep drop-offs rather close. That is why I chose this specific spot. Hopefully there are some bait fish or some bigger fish patrolling this area. Now I too watch quite a lot of YouTube content, especially fishing tutorial type of things, because I'm still learning how to fish with some of the lures out there. So because we actually stand a chance of not catching any fish out there today, I want to focus on a specific lure. The reason why I'm picking this specific lure, it seems that most of the content creators out there agree on something for once. That is why I specifically want to focus today on using little Fluke to try and find some fish. Okay, so we are two licensed anglers out here. It's me and the wife doing some fishing out here today. So here in Nevada, you're allowed 2 rods per licensed angler. So we have each one a baited rod out there, and we're going to be using our second rods with some lures. Now on the one rod we have our anchovies, trying to find some stripers. The second rod is the carp setup. Hopefully there are still some carp in this cove feeding around. And then the wife is using a little paddle tail. I'll show a little picture of that. She actually just managed to lose a fish. She hooked one. I didn't set the hook properly, managed to lose one. But it's a good sign to see that the fish are in this area. Hopefully we can get some. Now on my rod out there today, I'm going to focus on using some flukes. These are the super flukes that I'm using. Most YouTubers seem to agree that the fall is a perfect time to use some flukes. This is basically a plastic version of a crankbait. A great way to imitate injured bait fish and get some strikes, especially seeing how the fish are chasing around balls of bait fish. But first we need to talk about how we're rigging them. Now of course you have a few different options when it comes to the rigging of the flukes. This one I have on a normal little worm hook. The reason why I'm using a normal worm hook, it's quite a shallow gap, trying to hide the hook inside the bait. Because we're fishing super clear waters, it's easy for the fish to see your lures and they need to look the right way. And you'll see on this setup that I have the hook tip exposed. When you're rigging a fluke with the little ring of the hook exposed, the more forward you move your hook, the more likely this is to sink down. So there's a great way to try and fish a bit deeper. If the hook is forward, it goes down, it swims a bit deeper. The second way I have one rigged is on a Texas rig kind of setup, but I don't have the Texas rig weight. It's just a Texas hook style, and it's a much bigger hook. This is a 4-odd wide gap hook. And with this one you'll notice that the hook point is not exposed. It's actually deeper inside of the little fluke there. Having my line coming out of the fluke, this is a great way to get the weight to move backwards. This just means that this does not sink quickly with the weight being in the middle. This is a slower sinking lure if the weight is more towards the middle. So this is a great way to try and fish on the upper side of the water column. This is particularly where you'll find the boils happening is on the upper part. That's why top water baits work. That's why I rather want to use it like this when it's up higher rather than swimming down. This is going to stay on top of the water. Hopefully you'll get a better strike like that. The rigging of a fluke is quite simple. We're going to take our hook, we're going to put it through the nose of our little lure. Depending on where you want your hook to go, if you want your hook exposed at the front, you only go in about a 1/4 inch. You bring it out through the belly of your lure, move it all the way around. Once you get to the top part where you need to bring it over, you twist so that the hook is pointing in the right direction, and you just basically hook it through your lure. And you push your hook through the little lure, and you kind of bring it back some and try and skin hook it. That way it's nice and flush. The weedless way of fishing the fluke. There's still some grass dying off. You don't want that hook to be caught on something. This way it's weedless. Now the problem with using these little setups, as soon as the bass grabs it, you need to set the hook quite hard to get this hook point exposed to hook the fish, and that is something that I'm rather struggling with. I'm used to stuff like carp and trout where you only lift the rod tip, you don't rip it, you don't set the hook, you just put some tension on there. So a lot of the times using this style of fishing, I find that I'm not actually hooking the fish. They easily spit the bait if you don't set the hook hard enough. So this time around, I'm trying something a bit different. I am nose hooking my flukes. This is a more finessey style of fishing. The idea being if the fish grabs the entire thing in its mouth, the hook point is exposed. Much easier to actually hook the fish. I don't have to rip the rod that hard to set the hook. And to ensure that my little plastic bait stays on the hook, I'm using a little bait screw. It's a little screw that you just screw into the front part, and I screw it all the way in and then just hook my hook through that just to make sure it stays on there. Now many pro anglers will tell you that this time of year the fish are schooling together chasing the bait. That's why it's better to have 2 hooks, have a setup where you have 2 different lures on there. That way if you catch one you might catch 2 because they're all schooling together. And that is the system that I'm using here. I have a little swivel going down to a bead. The bead is just to use as a stop for my secondary swivel, so that can move up and down on the line so that doesn't get tangled when I cast. And from that I have the one lure connected. Below that is another swivel with a longer piece of leader with the same nose hook lure. Now the first thing you'll notice, I'm using my loose speed stick, my worm rod for this. Reason for that, I need something light, something that I can cast out these light lures with, but something firm and sturdy so that when I move the rod I impart action on the little lures. If I use something like my light setup, again I get good casting distance, but when I move the rod to get some movement from the lures, because it's a very flexible rod, it's not going to impart the movement to the lures. So you need a stiff rod to do this. So what I'm doing is I'm casting out, giving it a few seconds to sink down, and with the rod I'm just going to be jerking little flukes in the water. We want our baits to be erratically moving around, imitating some injured or dying fish. Alright, and that's going to be the plan for today. Going to be casting this around, the wife is going to be casting around some lures, and we have our bait soaking. Let's see if we get on some fish. And there we go guys, finally managed to get a fish, but it seems to be a small little striper. Just want to assist the wife in landing it. No need for the net. She's going to boat flip him straight onto land.
Oh, yeah. Need some forceps.
This little guy swallowed the hook, so we're quickly going to get some forceps and get the hook out. Alright guys, so first little fish for today. I'm going to get him back into the water.
But very coy.
Yeah. And there he goes. There we go, guys. Finally rebaited some new anchovies. I casted it out there and we got a fish. We have some mud going into the water, making the water rather murky. Oh, and it just came off. Could see him swimming around, but he came loose. So let's rebait, try again. Alright guys, after losing 5 fish in total, finally have something on the line. This is on corn, so most likely going to be a carp. He's swimming towards us, so I just want to reel in the slack. And that just goes to show you should never give up. After failing 5 times, rebait it again. And finally, I'm also on the board, which means it's not just the wife that can catch fish, I can also catch them. It's not the biggest carp, but more than happy to see one finally. Gonna bring him in closer so the wife can get him in the net. And there we go, fish in the net. Alright guys, there we are, finally landed a fish for today. I'm on the board. This breaks my strike of 7 fish lost in a row. Finally on the board with something again. Good old common carp. Wife's down at the water. I'm gonna hand this one to her so she can release him for us. And off he goes. Not the biggest carp, but more than happy to get that one. Finally on the board with a fish. And just before we pack up, how about another tiny little striper? There we go, tiny little striper. Lots of the small guys around, not seeing any big ones, but at least the small ones still fun to catch, so you can at least say you are catching some fish. Let's get this tiny little striper back into the water. I don't think the GoPro would see it, but it's a bit of a drop off to get down to the water, so we're dropping the fish, but we're dropping him head first, and off he goes. Alright ladies and gentlemen, I want to point out that we've been very lucky today. The problem with fishing during the fall, fish tend to be in different phases. You have the big fish, the big stripers and bass chasing the schools of fish, and the small stripers, they remain shallow, because if they go out there the big fish are going to prey on them, and stuff like the catfish and the carp tend to stop feeding. It takes a long while to find that one little carp that was willing to feed. So this time of year can be quite slow in finding fish, meaning that every bite you get is an opportunity you have to pounce on. Why I'm saying we're lucky, we had quite a lot of bites out there today. Normally it's a lot slower than that. Having lost 5 fish, that's a big problem. If you're only going to get 2 bites in a day, you need to be able to catch those fish. So losing those fish is a big problem. But at the end of the day, we were still successful, caught some fish out there. Now, of course, I started out today talking about the little fluke. I still believe that's a pretty good lure to use if you're in an area where there's lots of fish. If you can see a boil happening or seeing bait fish around, I do believe the Fluke is a pretty good lure to use. The action in the water, I know I said it's kind of like a jerkbait, but it's a lot slower than a jerkbait. It stays in the strike zone for a long while. So if you can find fish, I would recommend throwing out a Fluke towards them. It's something that I believe will work pretty well. But as far as a search bait, searching for fish, didn't do that well. Something like the little paddle tail, something that you can swim around quite quickly. It's a lot better for a search style bait. But the Fluke is definitely something that I would have on me if I find a boil, or maybe I'm on a boat or a kayak, something that I'll have in my arsenal ready to throw out there at a moment's notice. Alright, but the struggle was real today. I want to thank you guys for following us on this expedition. If you've learned anything from this video, please do give me a little thumbs up. Feel free to ask any questions down below in the comments. If you've not subscribed to the channel yet, the big red subscribe button, you press that and it says subscribed. When hitting the little bell notification next to that, then YouTube will notify you of when I upload videos. If any of you guys had pretty good luck on the Fluke, go down in the comments and tell us that as well. But thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.